Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
You ever been in a situation where you can like physically feel how much nobody really wants you to win? I think this is a situation that Dillon Gabriel finds himself in today. Anything that Dillon does today, there is going to be a heavy incentive to paint it in the most negative light possible. One, obviously, if you're a Shador supporter, right, and you're only here for Shador, then Dillon Gabriel serves as a real obstacle for Shador Sanders, more so than like Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco, because they're not in the same competition that Shador is in, right? Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, they're battling to be the week one starter, but once one of those guys wins that competition, the other guy becomes a non-factor in this whole conversation. Dillon is a little bit more unique because he was drafted the same year as Shador and he was drafted ahead of Shador. So any plans to play a rookie, that you would usually have penciled in for Shador to play, you have to factor in if Dillon's going to get that opportunity first, if you're somebody who's looking at this from a Sanders perspective. So obviously that's there for Dillon Gabriel, but also for most Browns fans, let's just face it. Dillon Gabriel is probably the least exciting option outside of like maybe Kenny Pickett, but at least Kenny Pickett was a former first-round pick. He's short. He had a great college career, but it wasn't a very exciting or super notable college career. And he's seen as having very low potential for being the actual answer to the Browns quarterback problem. And that means that in this environment, there is some truth to the idea that Dillon can look identical to how Shador looked last week and still have his performance downplayed much more. Again, there's much more incentive in the media to hype up Shador right now. Just look at how many people are definitely cashing in on that right now. And then with Dillon Gabriel, since he's juxtaposed to Shador Sanders and kind of the natural antagonist right now for Shador Sanders, there's kind of an incentive to downplay everything he does. Just look at any highlight that gets posted on like any Browns associated or Cleveland associated social media channel where it's like, hey, look at Dillon Gabriel. He made a nice throw. All the comments are just like, he's short. He sucks. He's terrible. It's a rough environment, right? And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. And it's definitely real for Dillon. And I want to explain this environment, not just to make an excuse for Dillon, because I'm not a Dillon Gabriel fan or anything like that, but I do want to be fair to Dillon Gabriel, right? Because he's not my choice of quarterback, right? I was higher on like Will Howard than I was on him. And where the Browns picked him wouldn't be where I would pick him. And yeah, his height does bother me. His overall skill set, it doesn't make me super enthusiastic. But in a situation like this, where confirmation bias is going to be rewarded, especially if you go out there, he's terrible, right? If he looks kind of shaky, I want to make sure I avoid that desire for confirmation bias and really just give this a fair look and evaluate it fairly. So the question with all of that considered is, what can Dillon do today that will move the needle in a positive direction for him? I think the biggest thing for Dillon Gabriel today is everybody looks at him for the first time and has the same exact reaction. And the reaction is, my God, he's small. I remember when I was making videos for the Senior Bowl and I first laid my eyes on Dillon Gabriel in person, I had the same reaction, right? My God, he's small. And I remember talking about that on this channel, and people were like, what are you talking about, Quincy? He's not that small. He's this, that. People were trying to downplay how short the guy was. And then he shows up in Browns camp, and then people get eyes on him in real life, and they're like, oh my God, he's small. And then he goes to joint practice, and then the Carolina Panthers beat reporters are saying, oh my God, he's small. And then he gets trotted out there in Philadelphia joint practices, and you got Philadelphia beat reporters going, oh my God, he's small. Like Dillon Gabriel, you already know going into it, he's not a big guy. That's not what's shocking people here, right? It's how not of a big guy he is, right? He's not super sturdy built like a Baker Mayfield who was closer to 6'1", or a Russell Wilson who was shorter than Dillon Gabriel, but much more sturdy than Dillon Gabriel, right? And not to say that Dillon looks frail. He has a pretty normal build for somebody his size in regular life. Like if you saw Dillon Gabriel at the Giant Eagle, you wouldn't really think you just ran into an NFL player. And that's the number one concern that fans have, that people naturally have when they look at Dillon Gabriel, that he has to do something today to give you reason to alleviate those concerns slightly, right? He has to go out there, be really good at finding passing lanes. He has to go out there and be able to find those passing lanes while not losing where the underneath coverage is, which is underrated, right? A lot of guys can scoot into a passing lane. They lose track of a safety, throw a ball over the middle of the field, it instantly gets intercepted. He needs to be able to deal from the pocket, and you need to see him be comfortable enough in the pocket that he doesn't feel overly eager to exit the pocket, because he has to be able to find a level of comfort there to be successful with his skill set. Another thing that Dillon's going to have to alleviate, and this compounds on top of his height, he's not, in my eyes, a special athlete. And here's what I mean by that, right? Dillon Gabriel is an athlete. He's athletic. I'm not saying that's not the case. What I'm saying is he's not a special athlete. And if you look at quarterbacks who are his height, 5'11" flat and under, we're talking about Kyler Murray, we're talking about Russell Wilson, we're talking about Bryce Young. And for the most part, to be that short at quarterback, you have to be an exceptional athlete. The only guy on that list that's not an exceptional athlete is Bryce Young. But Bryce Young was exceptional in college, right? He was one of the best college quarterbacks that we have ever seen for a period of time at Alabama. Now, again, he had tons of talent there, obviously, played at Alabama, but that was what Bryce Young was. Dillon Gabriel has played at some talented places, never looked as good as Bryce Young in college, and he's not the athlete that Kyler Murray is, and certainly not the athlete that Russell Wilson is. Russell Wilson was a tremendous athlete, like a paradigm-shifting athlete almost at his size at the position. We really sleep on just how good Russell Wilson was early in his career and how athletic the guy was and how incredible he was. Go watch some old Russell Wilson, man, if you haven't watched it before. It's spectacular. I think we watched too much Russell Wilson, like wash Russ. It's clouded our image of what this guy was, but exceptional athlete at the position. And in Kyler Murray, obviously, he's one of the best athletes at the quarterback position overall, maybe outside of Lamar Jackson. And like, he's kind of up there athletically with Lamar. He's just not as good as a football player as Lamar Jackson is. But my whole point is, if you're going to be short in the NFL and play quarterback, you got to bring something to the table that's out the ordinary. And that's kind of the case in sports where height matters, right? If you're going to be short in basketball, you got to be insanely quick. You got to have something to offset the height. If you're going to be short in football, something's got to offset it, especially at the quarterback position. And that's what I find a difficult time identifying with Dillon Gabriel, is what is going to offset the lack of height. Because you could tell me the lack of height doesn't matter. That's bullshit. The lack of height matters, right? Not saying you need to be 6'5" to be a good quarterback in the NFL, but you gotta be a certain height, like at least above 6.5 feet, in order to do most of the things you want a quarterback to do with relative ease at the position. Like, that's just what history tells us. There's not any 5'8", 5'9", 5'10". There's not a lot of those guys that exist in the NFL. And that is for a reason, right? If you're going to be that short and play quarterback, you got to have something to offset it. And I think that would go a big way, right? If he was somehow enormously more slippery or more athletic than we thought he was coming out of college, that would be a big deal, right, to show off in this preseason game. He's got to do something to make you less concerned about the height. We can't just act like the height thing doesn't exist. It's the biggest thing when you look at Dillon Gabriel. If you walk out this game going, he looked short and he didn't really do anything that made me think that he could outplay his height, you're probably not going to feel good about Dillon Gabriel. If you leave this game going, hey, yeah, Dillon's short, but look how athletic he looked. It looks like he's really slippery, found some good passing lanes, was able to step up in the pocket and deal. Then we can start having a conversation about how much that height's going to matter. But he's got to open up that conversation first, and that's what he has to do this week or during this game, is do something to make you not think about how short the dude is, right? Now, here's another thing, right? Because I think if you're a Dillon supporter, if that's even a thing, maybe you like this video. You're not going to like this next part, but I think it's 100% fair and 100% true. The bar for Dillon Gabriel for this game is simply going to be higher than it was for Shedeur Sanders. And that's for legitimate reasons. Shedeur Sanders, whether his fan base likes it or not when I describe it this way, this is just the truth. Shedeur Sanders is here as a developmental prospect. That is how the Browns view him, as a developmental prospect. That doesn't mean that Shedeur's not going to play this year. That doesn't mean that Shedeur doesn't have a chance to play anytime soon. But it simply means that Shedeur is seen as a developmental prospect, somebody with upside that they want to unlock, but they're in no rush to play right now. That's why he's the fourth quarterback on the roster. You don't have a fourth quarterback on the roster if you're in a rush to play that guy, right? If you're in a rush to play that guy, you don't have four quarterbacks. So they're not in a rush to play Shedeur. They view him as a developmental prospect. He's 22 years old. You're going to account for a certain level of growth when you watch his tape. You're going to have a higher tolerance for mistakes and be more forgiving when you watch his tape, because that is the place in his development that he is being sold to the fan base and to the team as being at, right? Shedeur is being sold as a developmental prospect. That means there's going to be more grace in his evaluation. Dillon is not being sold as a developmental prospect. Dillon Gabriel is being sold to us as a pro-ready guy, right? The reason we drafted him in the third round, the Browns say, is because he's more ready to play than anybody else. He's 24 years old, 2 years older than Shedeur, and they've sold his maturity, his experience. He's even gotten some first-team reps off of that. He's an earlier draft pick. Yes, some people are going to take this and run a mile with it and be very disingenuous about how high the bar should be for Dillon Gabriel. But the bar is higher for Dillon than Shedeur, because you're selling him as somebody who's further along already, who's more polished already, and more ready to play. So you got to see that. He has to look more polished than Shedeur. He has to look more experienced than Shedeur. On some level, you're going to ask him to look more comfortable than Shedeur. The bar is going to be higher for Dillon, and that is fair, because that's how that player is being sold. Pro-ready. That's how he describes himself, right? Experienced guy. He talks about his experience, giving him a leg up. Well, if you're going to sell yourself as that, well, the expectations are higher. It's that simple. Again, not saying nobody's going to be disingenuous. There's going to be somebody who takes that and go, yeah, Dillon Gabriel didn't look like Brock Purdy. Let's cut him. That's stupid, right? I'm not expecting him to look like Brock Purdy. I'm expecting him to just look like somebody who's closer to being a polished game manager than Shedeur. I'm expecting him, or at least the expectations for him should be someone, you want to see somebody who looks like they can enter an NFL game and execute an offense at a competent level. If you watch Dillon Gabriel today and he looks like a work in progress, I don't think that's the greatest thing in the world, right? Whereas if I would have watched Shedeur Sanders, he looks like a work in progress. Well, that's exactly where I think Shedeur is as a developmental guy in this quarterback room right now, right? Dillon's not that. Dillon's somebody who is in the mix to at least back up the starter this year. Like, he's going to have to play. He has to look like he's further along than somebody like Shedeur, who's probably going to be actually playing the second half of the season. So this is what Dillon has to prove. I feel like this is a pretty fair look at what's going on around Dillon's first game, and what the reaction could be around it and what are fair expectations for it. But I'm not the one who gets to decide if that's fair. You guys are. So let me know in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.